wore a red tie. No, because I remember.
Good evening, and welcome to the meeting of the West Hartford Board of Education. May I have the roll call, please?
Mrs. Blanks?
Here.
Dr. Greenberg?
Here.
Mr. Levine?
Here.
Mr. Paul-Uke?
Here.
Ms. Poland?
Here.
Dr. Thomas Farquharson?
Here.
Mr. Zdanowitz?
Here?
Student Representatives Grace Andrews
Here.
and Maddie Pliskin.
Here. Thank you. And whoever is less sick gets to lead us in the pledge, please.
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. And that allusion to ill students leads me to the next issue, which is a revision to the agenda order. Both of our student representatives are ill, and so they managed to crawl here just in order to give us their report. So the revision to the agenda order is we're going to move them first so that they can then go back to bed. But first, there's no student participation, correct? So I just want to know if there are any public communications. Anyone want to say anything from the floor? Okay, then. Can I do this even before unfinished business? Can we hear, please, are the reports of the student representatives?
Yes, I will go first. Congratulations to Hall Warrior Award recipients for Quarter 2, Chloe Amaya, Zach Goldberg, Daniel Zhao, and Jenna Zdanowicz. These exemplary students embodies Hall core values and beliefs and are very prominent characters in the community. So congratulations to those 4 students. Also, congratulations to Hall High's indoor track team for becoming CCC champions last week. It was a very big win, and we're very excited. The Gay Straight Alliance is holding a fundraiser for the Alley Foreigner Center, a shelter for LGBT plus youth. See Hall's website for more details and what they are collecting. The Community Service Club is organizing their second annual 24-hour famine event to raise awareness and money for hunger. There is free dodgeball games and a great meal at the end to break the fast. It's sponsored by various local restaurants. And finally, course registration for the upcoming year has begun. Teachers have spoken with students about course recommendations, and students have until Sunday the 11th at 11:59 to enroll in courses for next year. Thank you.
So winter sports at Conard are doing great. The hockey team actually beat Northwest Catholic twice in the past couple weeks. So additionally, students at private schools who are looking to come and join the Conard community are welcome to come February 15th at 8:30 a.m. and February 21st at 12 p.m. To do, I didn't write down what they're doing, to prep. Information session and testing also. Placement testing, there we go. But before you come, contact the residency office prior to testing. Additionally, spring sports schedules are posted and athletes are beginning to prep for the season. Actually, as we speak, in the Conard CAF is the 3rd annual Chieftain Baseball Pasta Dinner. Additionally, Unified Basketball has started back up at Conard. All are welcome, no basketball experience is necessary, and helpers are always needed. The next dates are February 14th, 21st, and 28th from 7 to 8 p.m. in the Conard Gym. And lastly, Kyla Dresser, a Connecticut local based in LA, will be performing her professional magic show at Sedgwick on February 25th from 2 to 3 p.m. And all benefits are going to sponsoring and benefiting the Conard Safe Grad, and tickets are $10, so please come. Thank you.
Thank you both. Any other comments before we let them go back to bed? Hope you feel better. Thank you for coming. Okay, we start with unfinished business, beginning with the adoption of the capital improvement plan for 2018-2019. Before I call for a motion, I just want to clarify. Again, this is the specific plan for capital improvements, capital improvement projects that we're going to undertake. It's not a school-by-school list or anything like that. And secondly, if I'm correct, the plan that we're going to approve does not have the $100,000 in it because we took that out last time. So just to clarify, because there was some question about whether we
Yes, so
had
the
it or not.
clarification would be that if you wanted to put it in, what you would do is vote this down, then refer to last week's plan and vote that one in.
Right, so the plan, so, exactly, so the plan, just to be clear, is the plan without the $100,000 study.
Without that and without the out years funding. That
Correct.
was also in there to earmark for the next 10
Right.
years, until 2030, correct.
Exactly, so before we have a discussion, may I have a motion that the Board of Education adopt the capital improvement plan for 2018-2019?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Discussion.
I would like to discuss. And I'm going to discuss a bit, perhaps this could lead to us amending this motion or this plan. Hear me out, tell you what I'm thinking. When we held our vote at our last meeting to remove the proposed air conditioning study, we regrettably did so without considering all the options available. We believed at the time the only choice for installing air conditioning at some point down the road was central air for all our schools, and an approximate cost of $3 million per building. Given a large price tag, adding AC to each building seemed out of our financial reach. And as such, the board voted to remove the AC study from the CIP altogether. We prided ourselves on having a robust discussion that night, but unfortunately we didn't have all the information we really needed to make a decision. As we briefly discussed last time, Glastonbury is moving ahead with air conditioning, and after our meeting, I was curious to know how they could do it. I just did some search on the internet, was it just a matter of they had more funding than we did? Well, it turns out they used a creative solution to solve the problem, and perhaps we could consider the same thing for our schools. I'd like to state right now that I'm speaking about another Board of Education. I have no inside information, a disclaimer. All I have is information I gained from a couple of articles in the Hartford Current from August 22nd, 2017 and January 31st, 2018. And you can find these yourself if you'd like by just going to current.com, searching for Glastonbury and air conditioning. I haven't spoken to anybody in Glastonbury about this, and I'm not an air conditioning expert, full disclaimers. Everything I've mentioned is taken from these articles, so if there's any misstatement here, it's my mistake. And please don't go calling them and asking them why, Dave, Paul, you said you were going to do this or that. It's my fault. All right. So with all that out of the way, according to the articles, Glastonbury's Board of Education initially had the same discussion we had. Let's put central air in all the schools. And they proposed that, and they sent it to their finance board. It was turned down because of the expense, understandably so. But they didn't stop there. They came back with a creative solution, something much simpler, using ductless air conditioning. Now, I wasn't familiar with that term when I first read it, so I looked it up, and it turns I have ductless air conditioning in my house. It's called Mr. Slim. It's whisper quiet. That's not exactly what they'd be using in the school, but it gives you a good idea. These are smaller units that they would use to cool individual classrooms. They wouldn't be used in common areas like hallways, the cafeteria, or the gym, but they would get the job done where students and teachers spend most of their time, in the classrooms. Interestingly, West Hartford already has a version of the solution in use at King Philip. And while that decade-old system won't meet the fresh air needs of our elementary schools, it shows that this approach has been put in place here and could work elsewhere right in our town. You might be familiar with the ductless AC units in your home. I said I've got one. And these were actually commonplace when I lived in Japan 25 years ago. So it was quite interesting. Of course, the ductless units of the size needed to cool an entire classroom would be larger than what you'd see in a residential house. It gives you an idea of what can be done. Glastonbury, according to the article, expects they can be able to put these units in the classrooms of 4 schools for a cost of up to $2.6 million. That's 4 schools for $2.6 million, when we were considering 1 school for $3 million. I say this is something we should perhaps consider. But if we consider it, let's give it time. Let's watch and see how things go in Glastonbury. Let's give it 2 years, see what the actual costs are, and if the units they use produce the desired result. I suggest we amend our vote tonight to have the air conditioning study added as a placeholder in the CIP for 2 years from now, and allow the board at that time to give it proper consideration. Now, I know it's hard to think about air conditioning on a night when it's freezing outside, but take a moment to remember what it's like in a classroom on those hottest days of the years. You know, we heard last time our custodians do the best that they can. They go around the buildings in the morning, open the windows the best they can. But you know, there are some classrooms where the windows won't open. The window frames are over 50 years old, and if the handle or the crank is broken, there are no parts to fix it anymore. I know a teacher personally who keeps a hammer on the windowsill, and if she wants to open the window, she has to hit the broken crank with a hammer. And then when she gets the window open up enough, she can use the claw portion to pry it open a little bit more, and that gets fresh air in the classroom as much as they can. Now, we know here in the winter that and Bob had mentioned this last time, some of the systems were designed that air would come in naturally, and here in the winter you can find that cold air does seep in through the window frames, the cracks, and this classroom even has a cracked window that hasn't been fixed, and you get some air that way. But this is what we're facing. That cracked window, by the way, is not the one they use a hammer on. Yeah. It's just one example, but it's a reality you may not be aware of. I'm sure we could find more stories like this if we looked for them. So with that in mind, just keep in mind we talked about some possible remedies that you might do at home. For example, popsicles, that could cool you down, but that's out of the question because that goes against West Hartford's nutritional food policy. A fan might seem like a solution, but it's really just blowing hot air in many cases. A bucket of ice and a fan could work at home, but in a classroom with 23 kids and a couple of adults, it doesn't do much. A particular school I'm aware of, back in the days before the nutrition program, one morning the teachers tried 3 hot plates to make pancakes for the kids, and that blew out the fuse for the whole second floor. So it's just an example of what happens in the schools. We know we need repairs. Air conditioning is something that the kids could use, and it would be in their best interest. So with that suggestion, again, I'd like to ask that we consider not spending any money, just adding this air conditioning study to the CIP 2 years from now, and have the board at that time decide if they'd like to proceed with it.
Just as a matter of form, can we instruct you all to put this back in 2 years, or do we actually have to vote to do it now?
You're voting tonight to appropriate for 2018-19 and 19-20. Anything beyond that is simply funding recommendations for the next 10 years beyond that. Every year you can revisit those. You could decide tonight to pass what's in front of you, and next year, because it would be, you could include it in at that point as a recommendation, or you could wait 2 years and put that in then as a funding. The out years have no bearing on this appropriation.
Right, so in other words, we could agree that this is worth doing, but we don't need to pass a motion. We could simply say it publicly, which will...
That's correct, and we would then incorporate it into next year's CIP that you had a placeholder in there for the out year.
Which is inherently how the air conditioning came to be.
Yeah.
for the
Right, I'm
first
not
place,
saying
so
even that
absolutely.
we will
Okay.
do that,
Yeah.
but I mean, so we don't need a motion, so, which makes your suggestion much easier to deal with structurally.
So, you know, we were on a tour at KP, and Dave saw those units in the school, and, you know, good for you doing the research, Dave. These are inherently a lot less complicated. There's not a fresh air system that has to be updated. There's not an entire air conditioning system that needs to be updated. There's not an engineering project that has to talk about CFM for the entire building versus a classroom, which is much easier math for air movement. So even leaving in $100,000 for a much less complicated system, I would be apprehensive about. Dave, did you spend money doing research on yours that you put in your house? I'd say probably not. But go ahead.
We did research, we
Right,
did.
of
Now,
course.
for a house, it's not really required. We didn't require the electrical upgrades,
Right.
you know.
Well, so
Things of
that's
that.
my point. It's a lot easier. For one classroom, you know you need X amount of draw for electricity for that particular time. That times 17 classrooms, they have an engineering department in town here, and that draw will give you the amperage and things you need. I've done it before, actually. So it's a much, much simpler system. And I actually even thought $100,000 for an entire air conditioning system just to review it was quite expensive. Even if, you know, to just review the system, I thought $100,000 was quite a bit of money.
But just to clarify, I hear what you're saying, but I don't think you're saying put $100,000 in. You're saying just remind us in 2 years or that we want to do a study. Maybe the study will cost $5,000. Maybe the study will be free. Maybe the study, right? But that we want to look into the question again in 2 years. Is that
That's
correct?
my suggestion. There's probably a dollar amount attached. What is it? As Andy mentioned to me, we traded a couple notes on this. A study would need to be done regardless of any improvement that we make because each building is unique. It's different. The windows do come into play in some, but not others.
You treat these by individual classrooms, not as a building entirely.
I think it's important, well, Bob, we've had some conversations with
about this,
Glastonbury.
yeah.
We've talked about the solution. I've had a lot of conversations with Alan Bookman, Superintendent Glastonbury. Do you want to do a quick 10-second piece on these units? We haven't done an in-depth study, which is what part of the study would be, are these feasible when you're looking at it? So that's part of the cost, but.
Yeah, I mean, it is an option that you can take on these, and again, it does give you the benefit of air conditioning. The big drawback for us is that one, it doesn't give us the fresh air that we would be looking for, but also it's these are individual units in each classroom. So versus a centralized air conditioning system where you have a big chiller plant. You gain efficiencies there. When you have these decentralized systems, you have multiple condensers either located on the ground outside the classrooms or on the roof. And then you pipe that cold air into the classroom, it recirculates existing air and chills it and gives you the air conditioning. Highly maintenance intensive. There's a lot more condenser units sitting up on the roof, and there's also an individual unit in each classroom which needs to be serviced. So it comes with a higher maintenance cost than a centralized plant would, where you have a couple of big air handlers, and then you would have one central chiller plant. So and there's an energy efficiency there too, long-term. So there's long-term ownership and maintenance issues that I think we look at as being a negative in that situation, though the upfront costs are much less. So that's
We'd
something
also
that
talked about in the past about needing to also assess the power issues. As you're sharing, when 3 hot plates will blow an entire school, adding individual air conditioning units will put a strain on the grid as well that we need to make sure that schools can handle.
Yeah, and when we did do that project at KP, we ended up running a specialized voltage line all the way through the building to do that. And you'll see that it's in a chase right in every single hallway, and it runs right down the hallway. So that was the major hurdle in that project, was getting the right amount of power to those units.
One of the neat things,
Right.
though, is that Glastonbury is going this route, so we can see their experience. We could actually visit a classroom. We could see,
Yeah, I think, respectfully to all here, I think it would have been helpful for us to hear all the options, even if there were worse and better ones, because, for example, your comments about it would be harder. It might be harder, but so much less expensive that it might have been worth it. I'm not saying it was. Just saying, in fact, it's nice to if we have all the options before we decide. Nevertheless, I think it's clear that whatever the options are, what we're talking about now is theoretical. And so what we're asking is that in 2 years, we revisit this question and look at all of the options pros and cons and see if we want to move forward at whatever price it is. And we'll talk about then whatever you think the price is, whether it's worth it and what the options are. Is that?
Yes,
very-
and- I mean, there's a yes and no here too. And that is that we have to recommend by the people that are experts. And that's Bob, in Plant and Facility Services, who's worked on a lot of buildings, a lot of sites with this. And we also have to look at our maintenance staff and how much that's been cut back over the past few years. That's one of the areas we have hit. And so there is upfront costs, and these are all things that could be studied and talked about. And again, I want to remind everyone that $100,000 wasn't, we're spending $100,000. That was an earmark to study air conditioning. So this would have been a part of any study, and it wouldn't necessarily have cost $100,000 either. But it's just like when we do a building, I mean, one of the things that shocked me was just the pure architectural costs with Charter Oak or the Hall Science Labs, where you're thinking of the brick and mortar, but and it's not just the drawing of what the building looks like, it's the plumbing, the electrical, all those parts of the architecture. So, I mean, it's one of those where I think if you want to do this, I think it's fair to do it the way you talked about it, Dave, which is, let's restudy this, let's talk about this, let's continue looking into this. Let's not table it as if this is never going to happen, which I understand. But I also just want the codicil of, when we present something, we want to make sure that we're going to present probably the best option, not necessarily every option that's out there. Because there are some things that's not my area of expertise, and I just have to trust people with some of these things too. So I just want that, and it's understood.
Yeah, that, very reasonable. I understand, Tom, we were up here, you present one option. That's fine, and that's the best course of action. Okay, so you did your MDMP, where's my MDMP down in military decision-making process, and you've come up with this. But even in that, you typically give options and tell them why option 3 was this, option 2 was this, and but option 1's the best course of action because of this. So in this case, air conditioning would have cost 4.3. There's an option here, but maintenance is an issue. We don't recommend it. That's all. I'm not looking for a full-blown, I don't know what Cheryl's looking for, but I'm not looking for a full-blown options, but it would give us the opportunity to digest and be able to make a better decision. We're not saying that, we want option 3 or 2, but we know option 2 and 3 aren't viable because our experts say they're not. Here's why this doesn't work. Here's why this doesn't work. And then the other subject is that, and this will be a theme you'll hear probably in the future, is that we often pride ourselves on being leaders, right? But it's also important to be a good leader to follow. And you got to know when, as a good leader, when to follow. And this opportunity that Dave brought up, following and looking at how Glastonbury actually executes this in their cost savings and their return on investment, if you will, that's a great opportunity to follow and not lead. Let them do the work. Let them do it and see if it works. Because again, I just want to remind you, we're looking at 7 to 11 days a year for this. So this isn't an opportunity where I think we want to lead.
Well, the point's well taken. I do want to point out Glastonbury didn't invent this. This exists in lots of places. There are places that have done it and have gone back to the other way. So that's the reason why to have Bob, Plant Services, and our town engineering present all the options, that's not going to happen. Because, again, Bob is great at what he does. He's not an expert on air conditioning. He's not an expert on what the electrical load will be. He's not an expert on where all the lines will have to be. Even if we do this, we're going to spend money on a study. No matter what, it may be only $15,000, it may be $20,000, it may be $2,000, but there's going to be something where we have to bring in outside consultants rather than just saying, well, let's just do it the cheapest way. And I know that's not what you're saying. I just want to clear that we couldn't have given you all the options to start with, and we weren't giving an option that precluded this. We were looking at a study to look at, okay, if we want to go down the road of air conditioning, this is how we will do it. Because even with this air conditioning going to 9 different schools and not meeting our not meeting any of the ventilation needs, you're talking about a $6 million outlay still, which may be I'm not saying that that's a wrong thing, and I'm using that number based on Glastonbury. I actually think it's a little more than that based on Glastonbury's number, but so before we spent that, we want to make sure you're not penny wise, pound foolish. So it would have to be something where we want to make sure we're presenting to the board a real study, not, well, this is how we think we can do it for the cheapest number. And you're right, we'll absolutely look at Glastonbury. It won't be just Glastonbury. It'll be the other places that have done it too.
But my point being is more solidified, because if we're going to spend money, I want options. I don't want, I guess Bob's not the expert in air conditioning. I understand that. But if we're going to spend money, then I want my options.
I guess I'm talking about the false notion that there was no options going to be presented. That's what
I think, I'm going to speak for Mark, or at least I'm going to speak for me, and I think that we agree on this. The point wasn't to say, we want a list of 12 options, and I understood from the presentation that there was one option for air conditioning that was going to be three whatever million per school. And in order to study how to do that, it was going to cost us up to $100,000. I guess when I then discovered that there were alternatives to that $3 million per school alternative, my sense was, well, if you had said, again, I'm not pointing fingers here, but the sense was that if on the table we had said, well, there's a couple of options out there. One is that we do the whole thing and it costs roughly $3 million per school. There's this other option. We don't really like it, but it's less expensive. We need to study all the options. We still could have decided not to study them. But it felt a little bit like a piece was not being told to us. You see what I mean? So it wasn't that we were going to decide the options. We just sort of wanted the whole thinking process.
I'll be honest with you, I rarely push back. I don't think that's fair. I don't think that's fair to them. I don't think it's fair to the presentation, because the question was about air conditioning and ventilation. So we have to present what we recommend also in terms of ventilation, everything on the table. So it's fine, but rather than saying at them, it should be directed at me, because I direct them to present. So I understand what you're saying. I just disagree, because it's not the time for options yet. It's the time for, well, if we're going to study this problem, here's what we're going to study, and here's what we'd put in, because here's an estimate of what something would cost. But the purpose of the study was to give options of what the cost would be. And it would be irresponsible to put in an out-year projection that put in low costs. You always put in what the most expensive cost would be so that people would understand this is what it could cost. But the study was proposed to give what the costs would actually be and what those options would be. So that's
Fair
the
enough,
only piece
and that
where I
may
want
just
to
have been
make
our
clear.
misunderstanding about how it all worked.
I did not understand that we were going to get options.
No, I didn't, and so that was just our misunderstanding. But I totally take your point. If I could change the subject for just a little bit of a moment on the same $100,000. Now that we've saved $100,000, could we spend some of that money on all of those heat shielding blinds and other things that we talk about that are...
We didn't save
low cost?
$100,000. We were putting in an extra $100,000. The $100,000 is out. We were asking for an additional $100,000 to do an air conditioning study.
Okay, let me rephrase. I understand. Is it possible to consider adding not $100,000 for a study, but some smaller amount for some of these shorter term but useful blinds? I don't know. We had talked about it and then we had dropped it, and I didn't.
Why don't we talk about some of the things we've done and some of the negatives that have also come from that with the heat reflecting, Bob, and the film?
Yeah, so we have had, we've done things with blinds, we've mentioned that before. As part of the KP air conditioning project, we also had put tint on the windows at the recommendation of the engineer to help with solar gain and to help a little bit with energy conservation. And we ended up cracking almost every window in that building because of that. Wrong application. So, so something like that. the things that we've done is some of the blinds in some of the south-facing rooms. We've repaired a lot of windows over time to try and get most of them operating, not all of them. So we have done things like that. And those are more operating types of issues and not really capital. We're really talking about capital. These would be bonded funds, wouldn't be appropriate for here. So if we were looking to do more of that stuff in the classrooms, it would be an impact on our operating budget more than in the capital budget. So
That makes sense. Thank you. I had no idea where it fit. Thank you. Other questions, comments, complaints before we're ready to vote? We meant absolutely no implication that you guys it wasn't about that. It was about our misunderstanding about how things went. Anyway, thank you. Okay. Yes, one more?
Just want to clear, so are we in agreement then that we should put this 2 years from now?
We don't have to vote on it. That's
We
just,
don't.
you're just talking, you're just talking amongst us, in that if the Board of Ed next year feels it's fine to do, then they'll do it.
Okay.
But it's nothing that we could put in a bylaw or a policy saying that we're going to look into it. It's just, we just, as a board, have to remember it. If we look different, then somebody will have to do some due diligence and, right?
And we are so intimidating that I know that the superintendent keeps notes of everything we worry about anyway, so that. Okay, on that cheery note, all in favor of accepting the CIP, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? The ayes have it. Thank you very much for your patience with us. And now we move to the second bit of unfinished business, is the adoption of the annual board meeting schedule for 2018-19. So again, before we can talk about it, I'll need a motion that the Board of Education review and revise as appropriate the proposed annual board meeting schedule and adopt a final calendar for the 2018-19 school year.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, discussion, and again, just a reminder that the second meeting in September has been taken off because it fell on Yom Kippur.
And just as a marker, this should have been approved last time, and it was my mistake to say, well, we can do it as a first reading and not in the second reading, in that we got caught up in the January. And so the motion that passed was to keep that, like when we went through the minutes, and it wasn't the actual calendar, so that's my mistake on that.
So we're clarifying a vote that we took before.
Clarifying a vote,
Okay.
so voting again to
Right.
approve the calendar or not.
Okay, so any discussion on the calendar that we liked last time? Okay, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
No? Okay. The ayes happen to have that one, too. Okay, and now we finally move to new business, which is actually technically old business also, because it's the approval of plans and specifications for the Hall High School Library Science Laboratory classrooms, which is going to sound really familiar to us, but is apparently a new thing, a new vote anyway.
Yeah, this is different because before we had to get approval to go out and for the bid process, but now let's explain what the next step is that you all have to approve.
Okay, so again, I think I need the motion before we can find out what that mysterious thing is. So, can I hear a motion that the Board of Education approve the early release package of plans and specifications dated November 17th, 2017 for the Hall High School Science Laboratory classrooms?
So moved.
Second.
Just to clarify, it's not the early release. It's just the approval of plans and
Well,
specifications.
I'm just reading what it says here. Okay, so approve the packages of plans, cross out your early release on the motion.
Yes.
Thank you for that clarification.
Also make a correction, it's dated February 6, 2018.
So ignore that too. February what?
6th.
6th. Oh, today.
2018, Yes.
Okay, so we did already approve the early, that makes much more sense. Okay, so
Yes.
forget what I just said. Okay, we're approving the things that we're going to see today. So
Yes.
now we've approved the motion. Please take it away.
As you remember, when we were here before, we approved the early bid release. And then this is the entire project and such. I'll turn it over to Bob and to Chris to explain the props we brought along and any questions you might have on this.
It does have air conditioning, so.
It also has a
And the
bucket
full
of ice.
bore. So we came before you back in November, and we had an early release package. And at the last meeting that I was here 3 weeks ago, we talked about CIP and how things don't always go so well. So, our intent was to have the early release package and have that go out to bid, get the steel, the concrete, and the site work in process for bidding and stuff like that. We've run into unexpected delays with getting into the state for review, and the weather went south on us with the hard freeze. So now we're combining to one phase. We were originally going to do a 3-phase project, the early release package, this package, and then the fixture, furniture, and equipment. We're now going to 2 phases. The early release stuff that you've already approved is incorporated into this. We're going to the state next week for final approval before we go to bid. So we're coming to you tonight with our complete package for phase 1 of this project. This is the Hall Science Lab project, if you, just a quick reminder. It's a 6-room classroom addition, from 4 chemistry, 2 bio, and then there's a renovation of the existing 8 science classrooms on the 2nd floor at Hall High School. So, this is a project we've been working on for several years and was in dire need, so we're very excited to be moving it forward. We've been working very closely with the faculty and the architects on finalizing the plans and getting these ready. Chris Likely is our owner's rep from Construction Solutions Group. He's going to talk a little bit about where we are with budget. Just so that part of what you're approving tonight is that the plans and specs are ready to go to the state for final review and then to bid, but you're also approving that we are on target and on budget, and Chris is going to talk about that.
Right, thanks. So the total project budget for this project is $12.8 million. Right now for phase 1, as we're calling it tonight, which is the entire building less the furnitures, fixtures, and equipment, our estimate right now from Fusco, who's the construction manager, is $10,083,000. So, in total, if you add this to all the other soft costs, we're under our total grant by about $800,000. So, and that's including the architect's costs, what other ever hard costs we have, as well as an estimate for the FF&E, because we haven't gotten that far yet. That'll be coming later this month.
One more example of how West Hartford leads the way in efficient and effective building. Please, go ahead.
So we're asking for your approval of this phase of the project so that we can go to the state for approval for their final review and approval to go to bid, and hopefully in March. We anticipate construction to be starting late spring. We are going to be a little bit behind us schedule on the addition. We were hoping to be done by December of this year, and we're going to push that into March of next year because of the late start. But the renovation of the 8 classrooms internal to Hall High School will be done this summer and will be ready for use by students in the fall. So they will have their classrooms for science classes. And then again, we'll continue to work on the addition rooms until March of next year. And we anticipate that they will be in there for the second part of the second semester next year. We will be coming back to you in 2 weeks with the fixtures, furniture, fixtures, and equipment package for approval to go to the state and then to push that out to bid. It's a much smaller package. It's right now it's budgeted at about $811,000 compared to the remainder of this project. So the $10 million for construction. So, any questions?
So, well, and I guess I don't know where everyone's up to speed, but for some of the new board members, this was an accreditation issue. So if you didn't know that, we potentially would have lost accreditation at the high school if we didn't have upgraded labs. So I just want you to be aware of that. The other thing too is, did you say that the internal classrooms are going to be done in the spring while they're in school? Summer. Okay. All right.
I'm sorry. You said late spring. I thought you said late spring and then the rest would be complete in March of 2019. So what exactly
Correct.
is going to be?
The new addition would begin this coming spring. So the addition, the 6 classroom addition on the outside of the building would begin this spring.
Okay.
And that would go until March of 2019.
Okay.
All right. The internal renovation, it's really 2 projects in one here that we're doing. So the internal renovation, which is the 8 existing classrooms, will be done this summer, as soon as school gets out,
Okay.
and then done through the summer, ready for August.
Okay.
Can you remind me, the addition is going on, and that will be separate from where the portable classrooms are right now. So the portables will still be able to be used while you're constructing the addition, correct?
Correct, yeah, the portables will remain as is, and access will remain as is. This will be an addition that will come off, if you're familiar with Hall and the bus drop-off wing, the bus drop-off location right at that. So right where that is in that circle is where this addition will go, and it'll have its own separate connection from the portables. Will not be physically connected to the portables at all.
Okay, thank
And
you.
if you remember from last time, the construction site will also be closed off, and so it won't impact the existing school year.
Thank you.
Bob, can you please remind me, or maybe Andy, what are the hours, thinking of the neighbors, the hours the workers will be on site? I'm thinking of the summer and during the winter months as well.
Yep, so the town noise ordinance allows us to work Monday through Saturday, 7 a.m. until 1 hour past sunset. So during the summer, we anticipate with the internal renovation, because that's what we're calling a summer slammer, we're going to be probably running double shifts. So I will go to the health department and ask for a waiver of the 1 hour rule. There might be occasions where we're running a little bit into 10 or 11 at night, but nothing past that, I would think. So just a standard double shift kind of situation. But that would be internal, not external work. So we'll be very cognizant of our neighbors and respectful, as we always are. So.
Thank you very much. Is there a mechanism in place? You recall one specific night, they had to work late at Charter Oak because something with the water was shut off and all.
Yeah.
In those situations, is there a way to advise the neighbors?
Yeah, we'll do what we did with Charter Oak, is that we had key people that we would reach out to and provide notice to them. And they also had, Joe LaPera will be the superintendent again on this project as he was at Charter Oak. He's always accessible, and the door's always open for people to come over and talk to him or indoor call. So, and we'll make sure that they have his contact info.
And I can confirm that too.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
I just have two quick questions. The first is, given how really beautifully the Charter Oak project happened, I trust you guys completely. But since you are the experts and I'm not, is this a project that you're happy with, that we sign off on? I mean, you're satisfied that it is your advice that we sign off on
Yeah,
this?
we wanted it to be round, but there wasn't, we couldn't pull it off, but we thought we had a theme going. No, I think, if you remember right, we've been through a number of different iterations of this, and I think that in working very closely with our science team at Hall and really across the district, working very closely with Paul and his group, that this is a project that meets the needs of Hall going forward, and also is very fiscally responsible. So I think we're happy with how it's going to turn out.
Yeah, and I think the faculty's been fantastic to work with. They've had a lot of great ideas, a lot of input, some long meetings, but it's but they've been great, and I think they're really getting just about everything they ever could think of that they would want in these rooms. And again, we're doing it in a cost-effective way. I think it's going to be some really beautiful space. We've toured a lot of different schools throughout the state, looking at recent science lab renovations, and we kind of picked the best out of those. And so we're very happy with the design that we have here. I think the faculty and the school are very happy with it too, and I think it's going to be very functional. And the whole idea here was to make it very flexible space, and thinking forward that things will change, but making it very technological enabled, and just thinking about things that will happen in the future that will make it very usable space for a long time.
I mean, I certainly commend you on the decision to have not only water fountains, but a chocolate fountain. I thought that was very nice.
I'm quite sure it'll be nice enough that Conard people will be complaining about the Hall Science Lab being nicer shortly.
Absolutely. And my last comment is a comment, not a question. I don't think it's fair that we made you carry all that without even asking you to show it to us. Do you want to show us anything? Or are you just carrying it around to show that you could do it if you wanted to?
They're actually
I
blank.
could open them up, right?
Yeah.
Sure. I mean, we could certainly open them up. And
No, I just meant-
Huh?
That's right. I just meant if there was anything you wanted to show us, now is the moment.
Nothing in particular in
You're
here.
just going to schlep it around.
Yep.
Fair enough. On that note, any more discussion or questions? Okay, all in favor of approving the package of plans and specifications dated February 6th, 2017 for the Hall High School Science Laboratory classrooms, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? It passes. Thank you so much. Actually, for my dissertation, I had the blueprints for an entire block in Manhattan, and I still have it because one day I'm going to put it up on my wall. One day, that's right. But that day is not today. Okay, we move to the second piece of new business, which is a motion by Carol, Robert, and Deborah. Is it Deborah? I've never even asked. Officially, yes. Officially, just that's since it said Robert, to accept the revised policies. And I'm just going to read the title. So I'll need a motion from one of you that the Board of Education accept as a first reading the following policies revised by the Board Policy Subcommittee: 4040 on nepotism, employment of relatives, 4160 publication of or creation of materials, copyrights, and patents, and 5720 search and seizure.
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Great. Discussion.
Okay, I'll go first. Okay. So for the policy 4040, personnel, certified, non-certified, nepotism, husband-wife employment, what changes were made? Let's see. So from the italicized to the bold, we put in immediately, so that would be the second line after, or let's say, and appearance of conflict of interest will publicly, so instead of that, it would be will immediately make public
The bottom of page 13.
in the bold.
She's just going through the changes made from the original.
Right, so on top, Mark, where you see the italicized piece, where after the paren Board of Education members, so the second line where it says conflict of interest will make public. So on the bold piece towards the end of the page, and
But just, I want to be clear. So the italicized means we remove everything, the bold means it's new. So we're
Right.
removing that entire thing, right? Not just,
No, right. So she's just flagging the differences between the old version and the new
and
version.
the new
oh,
version.
I'm sorry,
right, 'cause
I thought okay.
it's not entirely removed. The
Gotcha.
only change was immediately, where we have will immediately make public any relationship the board members are, or administrators, on and on. Do you see that? I could read the whole thing if you'd like.
If we only made slight changes, how come it's not just the slight changes are in bold?
The words are mostly the same, but some of it has been reorganized. And we also, if you see on the next page, have laid out by blood, by marriage, by law, the different degrees of relationship. So even though the content is very similar, the way it's written is different. And that's why instead of just piecing in, we've removed all of it and rewritten it. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So that makes sense. Yeah.
It's for
It's just that,
clarity.
it just when you italicize and then bold, it means you totally removed and you, so in this case, instead of going line item by line item, I would imagine that you'd say that we removed the entire first piece and here's our new verbiage. So I was just confused, I apologize.
No, that's okay.
Can we just ask a question before we move on to the next
Sure.
one? Is that okay? Yes, so you wanted to.
I was curious if what went into the consideration. I'm looking at the second paragraph. For us, it's at the bottom of page 13. It reads, "The board members should not vote on any action of the board which will directly affect a member of the immediate family of the member, unless requested to do so by a majority of the members of the Board of Education, only after full disclosure of the relationship has been made." My question is, it starts out, a board member should not vote, and for me, it feels like it should be a board member shall not vote. We need a little stronger word there. If the board member needs to vote for some reason, the rest of the board can ask for that. And I'm wondering if we might consider making that a little stronger by changing should to shall.
Yeah, we could do that.
This is a first reading, so when we bring this policy back
Back
next
to-
time.
Yeah, that
can-
section was just copied from the previous policy, Dave, so you can see where that comes from.
Right, but is that,
That's-
okay?
You can do
I mean,
whatever you'd like, sure.
Great. Any other discussion on this one before I move to the next policy?
I guess, and so immediate family or member, unless requested to do so by the majority of members. So let's just say, we're voting on the contract for teachers, and the majority votes says, oh, yes, let's let the members with teachers on the Board of Ed vote. I don't think that's very transparent or appropriate, because they're voting on something that affects. So I don't think that there should be a majority. If they can't and shall not vote, then that's it. It stops there. They don't think because a majority says they can vote on a teacher's contract because they're married to a teacher or in a relationship with a teacher, or however we describe it, that they should not vote, and it stops there because there's a conflict of interest.
I'm going to take a stab at that one. I think the reason that wiggle room is provided is given the possibility that there could be a substantive number of board members who have a close family relationship with, say, a teacher. So if 4 of us were married to teachers, then we would be in a situation where we might not actually be able to approve a contract.
Right.
In that case, we would want to make sure that members of the board did have the opportunity to vote so that we could approve a contract.
So in that case, I would venture to say a new policy, that you can only have so many people on the Board of Ed with spouses, or however you describe the relationship, that have teachers in the system. Because at some point, if we have too many, it would be a conflict of interest, and your voting really gets questionable. So I would venture to say that a new policy be that we could only have so many relationships on the Board of Ed because of the conflict of interest.
I think we might get into a constitutional problem there as far as who can run for office.
If you're
and be
interested in
seated.
that, I can certainly have Kimberly take a look at that to see if that would be an appropriate policy to consider. But I do agree with Deb that I think at some point you're going to have to balance out an individual's right to run for the board versus there's already 2 people on the board or 3 people on the board who have spouses who may be teachers or administrators.
It's a fascinating question, because the question would be, who couldn't be on the board then? Would it be the person just running now, the person that's been longest serving? So that's how, it's an interesting, yeah, and I see your point certainly also, because if we ever reach the tipping point, then do we have a vote? Or would it be appropriate, could you ever negotiate in good faith in that?
I was just going to say, I think the problem is, absent a rule like Mark is suggesting, and we probably can't do it, I understand that, but absent that kind of rule, if we were in that situation, I would be suspicious of any contract that we negotiated.
Yeah. So here's the thing, though, is we had someone on the board that took a job in Connecticut with the higher government. They had to remove themselves from this because there's a conflict of interest at that point. So constitutionally, something already exists that, so if you are
That was
appointed to.
that was a part of the job at the state. It was part of the
Right.
state rule that you can't work here and be elected to another
Right.
office.
So, I mean, all I'm saying is there's precedent saying that if this, then that. That's all. So if this, then that.
We can take a look at it certainly within the policy subcommittee. If there's precedent within an individual, there may not be precedent based on a spouse's connection or a son or daughter working as a teacher and so forth, which is really what this is then.
You could always go back to the nepotism piece.
You could, but what I'm saying is that the precedent you're talking about is based on individual. It's not based on possible connections with this. But we can certainly talk about it at the next policy committee and seeing what the ramifications are.
I imagine that this provision would be useful in the event of absences. Maybe one member goes in the hospital for a couple of weeks, another member can't show for some reason, and we don't have a quorum without this individual, and maybe there's a deadline where we need to approve a contract.
Yeah, I was going to say, it would be useful to look into this question, because I think we almost hit it once before in this group, just because someone had recused themselves for another reason, and then we were really up to the absolute, we were down to the absolute minimum. So I think it's worth pursuing what our options are. Meanwhile, though, I think Mark's question is a good one. Is there ever a situation in which we want to waive the obligation to step aside if there's a vote influencing your family? And the only thing that I had thought of, and I don't know that this is convincing, is that, let's say you're, I don't know, a structural engineer, and your spouse works for the school system, but you're voting on something that takes that kind of engineering skill. The group might say, we actually want your expertise on this, even if you have a spouse involved. I mean, that's what I was thinking, but you're absolutely right. It's possible that in order to get a political vote through, for example, a majority could push one way or the other. So I had never thought about it that way.
I just think that if you have it set where we don't have to make that decision, then it's a cleaner vote, and you're voting without prejudice. And so,
Would the policy committee be willing to go back and relook at that, at least, and consider, in other words, taking out the second half of that sentence? Or do you want to talk it through now, or what's your preference?
It's completely up to you. We can certainly, I mean, this is why we have first readings. We can certainly go back and take a look at that. But again, if the policy committee, I mean, it's, you know, the majority of you have been on the policy committee for this policy. This is a policy from last year's policy committee with Mark and Cheryl and so forth. So you worked on it last year. We passed it out last year, but we didn't want to have it because it would have straddled the summer. Okay.
We're just not as smart.
So, but the point, I guess my point is, we can certainly do whatever, but if you have a direction that as a committee or as a group, you simply want the policy to go, then my recommendation would be to voice it here, so that.
I guess my personal feeling is that Mark is right. We should just not allow, if it's nepotism, it's nepotism. I guess the only question that I would have before I voted in that way is, can anybody think of a situation in which, after full disclosure of the relationship has been made, a majority of the committee might still want that person to vote?
in a negotiation for contract. Absolutely. You know, if you don't have the votes, and I'm making this up, teachers out there, if the vote doesn't go with the contract and we want to give them a 2% raise, but they want a 5% raise, and then we have to vote on it, and the 5% raise goes, there's a huge conflict of interest in it.
Oh, no, I meant the opposite. I meant, is there any reason to leave this in?
Oh,
In other
sorry.
words, is there any legitimate circumstance in which we want to have the provision to allow somebody to opt in after full disclosure?
I'm trying to read very quickly. I can't see where it was in the previous one. It may have been there.
Last
but
paragraph.
It is last paragraph?
Yeah.
So I don't think it's, I brought it up. I don't think that there's a time where a conflict of interest would be okay to vote on.
So that's my question.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the one that I mentioned earlier, which is if we don't have a quorum because too many people had to recuse themselves and we absolutely have to approve a contract, then we're going to want to get more people in. And so one thought I had was to recommend that we add in a phrase or a sentence that says, such recommendation by the board shall only be made when a quorum is needed or when there are no other options for passing a motion.
I get that, but I don't ever remember, there's certain times where we absolutely need a vote, but we actually questioned this 2 years ago, I believe, that we didn't want to vote on a Tuesday, we wanted to vote on the next Tuesday, but we couldn't because timing and things like that. But there's always, so for instance, if we didn't have a quorum today to vote on the policies, this would just get pushed off to the next meeting.
The nepotism situation doesn't typically change from one meeting to the next.
No, but so for instance, if,
But your argument is the nepotism would be overruled by the need to have a quorum.
Right.
So 2 weeks later, we'd have the quorum.
right,
No, we would not.
yes, you would. You're talking about people sick or something like that? Oh,
I'm talking about, let's say 4 of us on the board had a situation where we had a conflict of interest.
Oh,
And now
I
we
see.
don't have a quorum to vote on a contract.
I mean, there's 2 of us right now. That's
Right.
just the elephant in the room, right?
Right. So I think that in that situation, right now, we're fine, but thinking ahead to who knows what happens in the future, we could potentially, I don't think it's likely, but we could end up in a situation where a majority of the board would need to recuse themselves, and then we wouldn't be able to approve a contract. So I think it's important for us to have language that allows for those members who would normally need to recuse themselves to come back in, but only if absolutely needed. And maybe we can add language that speaks to that, so that we don't put ourselves in a situation where we can't approve contracts.
Well, but I think Mark's right, that if we approve a contract with the approval of people whose partners are benefiting from that contract, that would be suspect to me, even if we had to do it. I mean, I think there has to be, I mean,
hence why I thought it would be good to have a separate policy saying that only so many can be on the board that have relationships with, how they're defined here. So that's what I think Kimberly can help us with. And that if that's the case, then that circumvents that issue right there.
That would be a separate policy we'll create that we'll look with Kimberly, Shipman, and Goodwin, see if they exist anywhere and if there are,
but
if there are
barring,
loopholes.
Can we
Right, so
see what
the-
other school districts do as well?
Yeah, I mean, this is Connecticut General Statutes language, so this at some point was from Connecticut General
This is
Statutes.
CABE's language, so
So-
this is what other districts do.
No, and that may be that you choose to have a higher bar than than they do. As far as timeline goes, the only time we do have a timeline where we have to approve a contract by. Sometimes once you've entered negotiations, entered agreement, you have a timeline. But what could happen if you were just in the hypothetical where you were short and the meeting wasn't for another 2 weeks, you could call a meeting giving 48 hours notice, a public meeting, for the purpose of that, if it ever came up.
right, I guess my question about the example, I mean, I think the problem with the example that you're raising, Deb, which is a real one, is that does get into direct nepotism. But in a situation where the nepotism is inadvertent, so for example, when we had a hearing, right, 2 people that had to do with the teacher, 2 people were automatically recused. One person had to be recused for a different reason. There had to be 4 people on the board. That was it. If we'd had one more person who had to be recused for some separate reason, we would not be able to hear that. And that's where I get worried. In other words, even if we had such a rule, right, so we only had 3 people, for example, who had to recuse themselves, if a 4th person had to recuse himself for some separate reason, we'd still be stuck and we couldn't hear that.
Yeah, I think this one, though, I think this is pretty much for benefit, not in that case. So I think this one pretty much does relate to contracts and maybe
employment.
votes of employment. So the only other time I could think of this coming up would be the pro forma in May, where we have the non-renewal list that goes to you, and it's just the people who are only on interim contracts. But let's say Carol's daughter was hired and we didn't have the vote, you could direct her, because she's going to vote to accept it because it's such a pro forma thing that we do every year. That's the only one I can think of where you wouldn't say, but again, if she voted against it, that would create the problem. It is absolutely, your point is very well taken here, that I'm not sure there should be the codicil there either. It's CABE language. We'll definitely look up.
We can certainly look at the.
Why don't we circle it and come back with the policy committee? Andy can communicate with
Yep.
what.
We have certainly changed CABE language before.
I'll say.
Sure. No.
Well, and certainly, no matter what we do with that clause, we will change should, which is a sort of moral
To
statement, to shall, right? So that at least is going to be more
We shall.
We shall do that.
And there's a question that you're getting to, Mark, that is, there's the legal and the policy versus the real-world appearances of what does it look like for the board. That's understood.
Okay, the next policy? Would someone talk us through that one?
So, yes. Let me make sure. So this is on. The next policy is policy 4160, which is personnel certified, and, what did we do here? So the change, what was the change?
The addition of language.
Yeah, I'm just looking.
And 4160?
Yep, we're on 4160.
Yeah, if I recall, because I was on it in the spring when this was done.
Oh,
It was
here it
this.
is.
Oh,
Okay.
okay. Sorry, go ahead.
So I believe the change was where we have staff members are encouraged to contribute professional articles and new items to local, state, and national agencies. And in the italicized piece, it says up above, professional staff members shall be encouraged to write and publish educational materials, whether it be for local use, periodicals, or books.
This also broadens it.
Yeah.
About the professional ethics that you.
This updated
that-
it from 1987, the italicized area to the new, which is a combination of the CABE and guidance from Shipman as well.
And it's
Right,
that
that it gets
anything
cleared through the-
published
Yes.
goes through my office, Paul's office,
Correct.
to make sure that it's,
Appropriate.
that it's representing the work of West Hartford Public
Right.
Schools and not misrepresenting what's going on.
Right.
And I have a question on this one. And as I said, I was there, so I missed this one too. But under copyrights and patents, the first sentence says, the very last sentence, I mean, the first paragraph, the last sentence says, such materials developed as part of regular employment are equally the properties of the school system and the employees. And then the very next sentence says that the school system has the legal claim on all products created by its employees on the job with the assistance of school system funds. What's the difference between situations where you split it and situations when the legal claims, if they're both on the job?
My understanding from, again, conversation, and Kimberly isn't able to be with us tonight with an emergency, but the last section there, the school system retains the right to legal claim on all products. This is standard boilerplate language, saying that.
It doesn't mean that you don't split it, you mean?
No.
No, and wouldn't necessarily split. We couldn't have a teacher that we've paid over the summer create a fourth grade history curriculum that involves local resources, and then she goes out and sells that, or he goes out and sells that and makes profit from it, because it is inherently district work that's already been paid for.
So employees on the job and regular employment, that's why they both, isn't that the same thing? That's what I'm trying to understand.
It's actually, could be slightly different in that employees on the job, this, I believe, would be the legal connotation. Employee on the job is your day-to-day operations of being a teacher, whereas we pay sometimes for summer curriculum work to go through what's happening during the summer. And so that's not necessarily considered to be regular on-the-job work, but they're still being remunerated by West Hartford.
So that's why, so the assistance of school system funds is the relevant phrase, and it means additional funds beyond your salary.
So at that point,
Okay.
that person's like a consultant almost.
Gotcha.
Correct.
Being paid separately.
Correct. But it's, again, shepherding the district's funds and protecting the right
Oh, no,
to
it
that.
makes sense. I just couldn't understand why in one case on the job and
It's
one
a,
case
and
on the
we've gone
job.
back and forth, and it's a legal.
Yeah, there might, I mean, since there might be a clear way to say that, or it might just be my ignorance, but now at least
This may be the clearest way we have to say it.
That may be, but I just wanted to, so I just wanted to understand it, because then it makes sense. But that is my only question. Any other questions? Okay.
All right, then moving to policy 5720, and for this one, we added the breathalyzers and passive alcohol screening devices. And you want to take it from here?
Sure, yeah, this adds the section there in bold saying the use of breathalyzers and other passive alcohol screening devices may be used only on the express authorization of the superintendents in accordance with such procedures as the superintendent may devise. And this is really asking for this authorization. Our goal is to be able to use passive alcohol sensors for prom and for homecoming dances exclusively at this point. And this really brings us in line with neighboring school districts. Farmington, Simsbury has been using these devices. This is actually the device from Simsbury, and they've been using these for about 10 years now before their dances. And really, a passive alcohol sensor is nothing more than, as they're entering, a student talks over this for 3 or 4 seconds, and it just registers that there's no alcohol detected. No, the red light's the battery. The green light indicates there's no alcohol present. And so our goal would be to use these upon entering. We would purchase 10 of these units. We would train, obviously, chaperones and school administrators in administering this, and we would go ahead and use these for everyone coming into our dances. We would make sure that students were aware of this policy well ahead of time, in talking with folks at Simsbury and such. And actually, this is something that, Tom and I have talked about for years and gone back and forth on, and it's really what sold it for me is the request of some of the chaperones of these dances coming forward and saying, we're worried, and we'd really like something like this. And so it's a response to that, and doing research and talking with neighboring districts, we feel that it's time to go ahead and do this. One of the things I thought was interesting, in one of the other administrators shared with me, I don't remember which district it was in, that they felt one of the real positives that they didn't realize ahead of time in doing this, but came out of it, was it gave kids a way out of peer pressure. It gave kids a way of saying to their friends, I'm not going to drink because I know that I'm going to be tested going into the dance. And it gave them a way of saving face, which is something we're always about. And so I think it's a positive for kids. I think it's something that we're excited to go ahead and do, and I'll leave it at that.
And just to be clear, because I wasn't, to emphasize, if I understand this, that you can't use this anywhere you feel like it. It
No.
has to be specifically approved, so it's not like we're going to turn the schools into police stations.
This is something that would be specifically approved. This is just simply giving us the authorization for Tom to say, these are the
In this
situations.
circumstance, right. I just want to make sure that was clear,
And
absolutely.
we'd set the guidelines, and this is something, I'll be honest with you, I was probably the biggest one dragging my feet on this. I always get nervous about, I don't like a culture of doubt. You know, that's a big part of me that I don't want with the distrust. But I have to listen when enough people tell me we're concerned. This isn't about catching people and getting them in trouble. It's about keeping people out of danger. So we say right now this is about homecoming and this is about a prom. Does that preclude it from being before a basketball game? No, it doesn't. I mean, this is the kind of thing that we don't want to get into that. But the reality is, if we found something, or heard something or knew something about it, and we would always notify. Yes. This isn't we're going to do gotcha here. We're publicizing, this will be here at the prom. You will walk through this. Be prepared. This is not hey, guess what we're doing tonight.
Yeah, it's not a gotcha by any stretch of the imagination.
Thank you. Question. With the device, let's say there is the unfortunate circumstance where it does alert you that someone had been drinking. If and what type of follow-up care is done?
At that point, again, we're working off of different districts and the models that they've used, but at this point, if someone was to trigger a positive result with that, they would be obviously taken to the side with an administrator, and at that point, West Hartford Police, which are in attendance at our dances, would be involved.
With most likely the phone call immediately to the parent.
Sure.
I mean, that's the first step.
Sure.
Would always be that. And it's not we're bringing them over to the police who's about to put them in cuffs.
But that's
not
where
what
the
result
secondary
would be. That's
assessment and such to make sure.
and then because we have to assess to make sure it wasn't a false positive. Yeah. And then at that point, if it was a test that would be positive, the student would come back and be put into the student assistance team, which we'd meet with, talk to the parents, talk to the student, try to define, is there a problem here? What's going on? Make sure counseling is available to the student, as well as the ramifications that happen when you come to a school event. under the influence.
Thank you for elaborating on that. That's what I was trying to explore as well, to make sure that it doesn't just stop there, recognizing the unfortunate prevalence of underage drinking. So glad there is certainly an extended follow-up care.
Yeah, actually, I don't even know if such things exist, but I think this is great. Do we have any mechanisms to check about drug abuse?
When somebody is in the student assistance team for a variety of reasons, and that could be from a report, could be some self-report, another report, could be somebody comes in clearly under the influence and it's not alcohol, but you still know they're under the influence, which would be typically if it's in school and you have a concern about a child, they'd go to the nurse, and then they would go through the process with the nurse, vitals, things like that, where a health care professional would look into what's happening here. Really, this is, again, nothing to do with we want to get the kid in trouble. We want to make sure, is this kid all right? What did you take? What did you have? I mean, we've had, we all know different stories over the years. And then when they're in the student assistance team and we're talking through and during the counseling period, one of the things that can happen at times, and Substance Abuse Prevention Council, we've talked about this before with, is we can tell the parents that that child needs to be drug tested. And in fact, if we believe they are such a risk to themselves, we can make it a prerequisite before they re-enter the building that they have gone to the Wheeler Clinic for testing, for counseling, because we can't guarantee their safety otherwise. So that's the only real testing. Yeah.
One more question on the passive alcohol screener. What is the sensitivity level of that? Is it, I mean, if somebody has cough syrup and then they come to a dance, is it gonna trigger the positive response?
The documentation on it, and we're also working closely, obviously, with Eric Dempsey, who has history with devices such as this from his time as with the troopers. There are things that will set off false positives, Listerine and such. And again, that's where we would make sure there's additional screening and make sure that students were safe.
And it's something we know everybody would say, it's Listerine, which is where the extra screening comes in and the discussion with the child and what's happening and the discussion with the parent. It's not a breathalyzer, they're not putting their mouth into it, and it's not, again, that's not the purpose to test how sober you are, it's purely the presence of alcohol.
So will the students know that this is going to be, okay.
Yes.
And then the other thing too is, you going to please talk into this, or is it, how, now does every student or every 5, is it random? You may have said this.
Every student coming through will be screened with this. It's a 4 to 5 second screening where they simply talk over it and it samples in the sensor there, just like I did there.
To give you a picture of, right now we have a screening that's not an official screening so when I was principal, Paul's assistant principal, Rosina's assistant principal, every kid coming through goes through the line and shakes hand with a line of people. We talk to them. And so that was inherently a part of a screening process before, but you can only sense so much. So this doesn't, I don't want the picture of, if there's a bottleneck now, we'll have enough of them. We've talked to, we've talked to Sinbury, we've talked to Farmington about how it's done there. Have enough of them aside, A, B, C, D, E. Okay, go ahead, thank you, have a great night, have fun, that kind of thing.
So there's no like TSA pre-check or anything?
No, there's not.
No shoes removed anyway.
No.
And no belts.
No. Yes.
Yeah. Other questions? I think that's the 3. And so then it's a,
To accept as a first
I need to
reading.
accept as so can I, all in favor of the Board of Education accepting as a first reading the following policies revised by the Board Policy Subcommittee, 440, 4160, and 5720, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. Now we move to approve policies that have very little change, and so we're just going to vote them up and down. We're going to hear them as one full motion. If we have to break any out because they're an issue, we'll do that subsequently. So I'd like to have a motion, please, that the Board of Education approve the following policies reviewed by the Board's Policy Subcommittee with a whole lot of numbers that I'm not going to read because otherwise we'll be here till 10.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, discussion.
These are policies with no substantive changes. There are a couple of places where we have made some grammatical changes. One, we added a period to the end of a sentence. Again, nothing substantive here. On one policy, we made the word fundraising one word instead of two, and so forth. So we're available to answer any questions if anyone has any. Happy to answer any questions.
I do have one question, although I can't find it yet. Okay. On 1250, so if anybody has a question on one of them before then?
I do.
Oh, go ahead, then you go first, we'll go in order.
Well, thank you. We're going numerical order. On page 19 in our books, policy 1110, I was just curious, the first, second, the third paragraph in the middle of the page, it reads that a written record of board votes shall be available for public inspection within 48 hours of board meeting, excluding Saturdays, Sundays, and legal holidays. Board minutes shall be available in an unapproved form within 7 days of a board meeting, excluding Saturdays, Sundays, and legal holidays. Where can this be found? How would we go about doing that?
In the superintendent's office, there's a record of all.
In the office, so you would come here, it's not online
No,
yet?
not at that point until you would
Okay.
go ahead and approve it
Do
officially.
we keep, once we do put things online, do we have the individual votes? Or does it go into detail of how many people voted for and against, or?
We maintain copies of the books and records in the superintendent's office.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions before 1250?
No, mine is after.
Okay. This is just a question, obviously, but I mean, it's, 1250 is community relations and use of school facilities. And it says it should be the policy of the Board of Education to encourage the community use of school facilities when such use does not conflict with school activities or proper administration of school property. I know that a religious organization is free to use the space. It's
Not free. Yeah.
What?
They pay rent.
No, I meant they are able to. I meant they are allowed to. So do we have any policy, like if the Ku Klux Klan wanted to rent or the Nazi Party wanted to rent? Is there a...
I'd have to look at the actual,
Yeah.
we did address this probably 6 years ago when we first put in, well, it's longer than that now, 8 years ago when the church first rented out Conard. There was a change made to a policy, but I think it was more the guidelines. But that was always the fear about it, is that you don't get to decide what's an okay church and what's not an okay church. So if, what's the name of the white nationalist church there, the National Christian Front? If they wanted to rent the space, in all honesty, if you rent it to another religious group, you would have to rent it to them also.
Well, although I'll add on that there is wiggle room within the yellow parts of our policy book, the regulations
Our
piece.
guidelines.
The
Yeah,
guidelines that
is where-
allow the superintendent to,
I can say.
to
And there's-
decline.
there's- and
So
there's-
if you thought that there was danger to
Yes.
school property or to
That's
the
the clause,
public.
right?
Or that there
The
might be
last- the last
violence
part
or-
of your sentence there in the proper administration of school property. If we felt that that was putting it counter to our mission, there are regulations
But
for
it
that.
could be a legal case afterwards
Sure.
if that happens.
Sure.
So-
Right, no, I was just curious. I figured you can't make any, okay. Sorry. I have a question on school-age childcare, which is 1251. This is just a question. Has the school system ever thought about putting out a call to see if there's a group that wants to administer all of the schools so that there's
Yeah, we've done that.
Consistency.
We've done that relatively recently. Bob Palmer organized it, and we've put out for bid, and some changes have happened. The questions come up before, why don't we do it? And the fact is that we cannot compete in any before school or after school daycare programs. We can't manage them. Our employees have to make X amount of dollars. They basically teacher salaries. So that's why the space is then rented. But it isn't just a pro forma, okay, it's renewed. Those are set contracts that are.
They are outside bid.
Okay. Great. I want to jump to a bylaw of the board. I don't even know if this is the right thing to ask, but any other policies before we get there? Go ahead.
Next page, page 33 for us, policy 1260. I'm just curious, this is just a question again. The first sentence reads, ideas, operating procedures, records, and publications developed in or for the school district may be available to individuals and outside organizations for use or distribution. And here's my question. When such use or distribution will reflect favorably upon the school district and the community, can you tell me why that's there, and are we just only trying to let things go when it looks good for us?
If I had to argue, Dave, I would probably say in 1987, when that was first put in place, it's the idea that, we're going to openly share information that presents the district in a positive light. Doesn't mean that anything's held back. It just means that we want to make sure if someone is using some of our material, they're doing so correctly, if I had to guess.
Yeah, I think the question is kind of why would we share something that we're not proud of, that would put us in a negative light. It's not a question that we can't release that information, because it's not really information. It's more like when outside organizations want to publish, when the college board comes to Jackie Coricelli and says, we'd love to come into your classroom and we'd love to make a video that encourages students across the country to take AP Computer Science. The idea with this is we encourage the branding of West Hartford through items like that. So I think it's meant to encourage the brand of West Hartford.
Okay. Well, what came to my mind as I read this was we have these emergency operations procedures, and let's say there was a bear walking through the school campus, and hypothetical, something happened, and news reporters then wanted to see, well, what is your policy for that? And that might reflect unfavorably upon us, so we wouldn't release that? Is that?
They could have a freedom of information request for it, so it wouldn't really be up to me whether I released it or not.
All right.
Well, but going along with that, I was thinking, if there was a nonprofit that was looking at effective drug use policies or whatever, and they wanted to know what different schools' drug use policies were and what their rates of success were or whatever, we might have a policy and our rate might not be as successful as some others, but it would still be useful for them to get a whole wide range of policies.
That's information, not operating procedures. And records, all of these things. And the fact is, anybody can have these. If we don't have to create it, if it exists, anybody can have it anyway through freedom of information. So it's really, this is meant to be, my intention going back to 1987 is to encourage the promulgation of things West Hartford is proud of that will kind of spread the word of West Hartford as a school system, so that we don't squelch the things. We're not just keeping things in. It's basically the board saying, we want the world to know about West Hartford Public Schools. So I understand exactly what you're saying with the worries. It's just nothing can keep me from putting those out if somebody requests it. So.
I have a bylaws of the board question. Again, this is just information. This says any vacancy on the Board of Education shall be filled within 90 days of its occurrence. Is there another bylaw or something that makes room for leaves of absence or something like that? Somebody's sick, somebody has a family emergency, they have to take a leave of absence for, they don't have to withdraw from the board altogether, right?
No,
But-
there's no guidance on that. That's really the board's decision on that. It would be up to you as a board to determine, if someone was to step away for half the year, you may decide that that's within your purview to try and fill that or not. That's up to you. But there's no specific policy or bylaws for that.
There is I'll add on to that, there's a policy on resignation.
Yes.
And it does indicate that if a person is no longer a resident of West Hartford, a bona
Yes,
fide
then they have
resident of
to
West
go ahead and
Hartford, then they do
resign.
need to resign.
Sure.
Absolutely.
But
have
there's
a lot
nothing
of-
that says, like, if you miss 3 meetings in a row, you're automatically kicked off.
You have
or
latitude on
anything
that
like
within your, as a board.
Okay, no, I understand. If there is, if you have to resign, then the vacancy has to be filled this way. I just wanted to make sure there was, it didn't mean that there were rules about when you had, okay.
No.
Great. Other questions? I had another question. Sorry. I know. I was just, bylaw 8355. The second paragraph, it says, while this policy does not limit comments members of the public wish to make, except as specially provided herein, formal charges or formal complaints against an employee of the Board of Education must be initiated in writing. As far as I understand it, the Board of Education has exactly one employee. So do they mean only complaints against Tom, or do they mean employees of the school system?
No, formal complaints could be against
Anyone.
the school system in general, school policies, anything like that, whereas it's just this is basically a statement meaning just you saying it up there doesn't make it a formal complaint. A formal complaint has to be, there's a separate policy for how formal complaints are entered into the system.
But is that true for any employee of the school system, or just for you?
No, it's because somebody could come up there and make a formal complaint about a teacher, where even though it's not yours, they're saying it there. Well, if they want to make that formal complaint, here is what the avenue is. Now, the reality of the situation is if somebody comes up there and says something, as you can see at the end of meetings, one of my staff will be talking to the person following up with them.
Right, so my question is, why does it say against an employee of the Board of Education rather than against an employee of the school system?
Oh, because they're all employees of the Board of Education. You may not hire and fire them, but their check says the Board of Education.
Oh, so it's false that you are our only employee?
Well, no,
We're just the only employee we could fire.
You're the only fire and discipline.
You're the only one you supervise.
I see. So we are the boss of all of you?
Yes, you are the boss of all of us.
Okay, thank you. That's what I didn't understand. All right. Any other questions? I think I've pretty much wrung that one dry. Okay. Then I would like to move, if I can find the right page. Nope, still not the
17.
right page. Sorry.
17.
No, this is the motion. We're back to the motion, so it's page whatever. You're right. So now we have to, right. So now I'm calling for a vote that the Board of Education approve the following policies reviewed by the Board Policy Subcommittee, starting with 110 and going on forever. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Okay, the ayes have it. All right. Now we come to our only hireable and fireable employees report.
Is that a reminder? Two good news items to start off with. We were notified the other day, at the end of last week, it is with great pride that we announce that West Hartford's middle and high school technology and engineering programs have been honored with the National Program Excellence Award by the International Technology and Engineering Educators Association. So this will be, it highlights the work done throughout the district by our technology and engineering teachers. And Hall, the Bristow, King Philip, Sedgwick, Conard, and Hall technology and engineering programs will be honored at the 2018 ITEA Annual Conference in Atlanta, Georgia on April 12th. So congratulations to Brian Cohen and all of our staff. Really good work and really a good statement for both our middle and high schools in an area that's sometimes forgotten about, but which shouldn't be, because we do maintain our comprehensive schools with those programs. I want to congratulate Sophie Kudler, a 8th grader from King Philip who won the town spelling bee, which is now sponsored by the Noah Webster House. So congratulations to Sophie. I want to remind people early, because they asked me to, and I said I would. This is the 60th anniversary this year, the 60th annual production of Pops and Jazz. And this opens on March 9th with performances the 10th, 15th, 16th, and 17th. So you do have time beforehand, but a reminder, if you haven't been, one of the great events in West Hartford Public Schools. Very good news that we just got, and Andy was on the phone with Derek Slapp on Friday, and we got the notification from the governor's office, I think yesterday. Round 3 of school security grants were announced, and West Hartford received 12 of those grants, totaling $417,643.51. These are the security grants that Bob, Andy have written over the past few years to augment all of that work that we've been doing on security, from the cameras to office reconfigurations. If you haven't been to the new Sedgwick office now, check it out, modeled very similar to the Hall office. But so this actually covers about half of the cost of our work with state grants that was previously not coverable. So that money will go back to the town. So that is very, very good news. This past weekend, we had a flu clinic here where we partnered with the West Hartford Public Health District to offer flu shots. I think we had over 230 people come in and get shots. I was wondering what the lines were here, and then I figured that out. And really good. I'd remind people the best way to stay healthy is with a flu shot. Our absence rates, our teacher absence rates, are actually up significantly. Our student absence rates aren't up dramatically from last January. I thought they would be. It's at 1%. It's not a huge increase, which could either be our kids get sick all the time, which basically is January. It's that time of year when we get a lot of illness. But certainly with what appears to be the severity of this, we encourage people to make sure that if they are sick, don't necessarily come to class and get anyone else sick. And I also want to note that if you're looking for me over the past week, 2 weeks, this is the beginning of we're actually well into it now. We started the non-tenure review process, and to give the new members of the board a refresher on this, or actually a primer on this, we have during a teacher's first 4 years, if this is their first teaching position, first 2 years if they're coming from another district, or 2 years if they're an administrator, we measure out and talk about if that teacher is excellent or has the potential for excellence yet. And we have a very high bar in West Hartford, because we all know that after 4 years, after somebody has tenure, it becomes more difficult. And while people grow and certainly become better, I'm not comparing a 10th year, 20th year teacher, there are things that if they're a cause for concern in the first 4 years, if work ethic is a problem in the first 4 years, that's not something that gets better once you have work security. And so that's something that I go to every meeting, Rick goes to every meeting, and then the members of our team that evaluate the different principals, as we sit in the meeting and we spend hours going over every individual's file, every observation that they've gone through this year. So, and we talk to their direct supervisor about what are they seeing. And sometimes these can go differently than somebody might have expected. It's also great for me, Rick, Paul, Rosina, Andy, Gretchen, as we sit through these, to make sure we're looking for the same things, that evaluators are, that this is similar, that it wouldn't be, well, Dave, you think everybody's great, and Cheryl thinks everybody's terrible. Well, where is the middle, and are we calibrated, which we try to make sure, which is one of our key pieces of work for professional development of administrators, are we calibrated in how we evaluate? It's a long process, but I think it's probably the most important thing that we do, because that investment that we're making during those years in the beginning teacher, I always tell people it's about $250,000 we're investing to see if we're going to put between hundreds or thousands of students in front of that person over the next 10, 20, 30 years. And we take it really seriously, but that's what's going on now. I'm happy to fill people in more on that as time goes by, and we have to notify by May. We notify earlier than that, but that's the list that would come up. So.
Just for a sense of the scope, how many teachers do we have that are undergoing this review process?
I'd say, what's that? 190 right now.
Wow.
So,
Wow.
and each one, we go through every evaluation they've done. So it's, if you see me with my iPad, or we're just reading all the evaluations they've gone through. So I think we're at Conard on Friday, where we're there from 8 in the morning till 4:30. And it's just straight through, going through each teacher, so.
I guess I've never thought about this before, but flu shots, there's a lot of news about it. Is that something that we encourage or can make teachers take? You know, in hospitals, you have to have a flu shot. Military, you have to have a flu shot. And, you know, there's certain jobs out there that happen. And I'm thinking, you know, in incubation, where's that happening in schools? Like, we're hearing schools are closing because of it. And is that something that, talk to me.
Yeah, I'd have to get back to you if we can enforce it. We've never done that before. We do offer flu clinics at our schools and on site. So we have one on the 4th floor for all of our employees. They can come in. That's when I get my flu shot. We have them at centralized school locations, and we let all the teachers know, come in with your insurance card. It's free. Get your flu shot. Go home. And I'd have to get back to you if we can force them to. I'm not positive.
I'd be interested because, you know, given that there are schools that have been closing because of it, and, you know, it's not always the kids. I think in one instance it was the teachers. They just didn't have enough teachers to teach, and they had to close. So it'd be interested to see, because if we can, I think it might be something.
Be another item for your policy committee.
There you
go.
Contract, yeah.
Thank you very much. Okay, and now for our second staff report, homework. Mr. Vicenius, Ms. McKernan, and Ms. Jones will report.
Before they come up, I will tell you that this is always the most requested board topic. People will say, we haven't done this. I'm like, oh, we do it all the time. But things do, you know, the research. We have Carrie did a report a couple years ago, 5 years ago now. Shocking how time flies, that I've referred to often when people have asked, and I've sent that out to people when they talk about 4 years, whatever, just in terms of the research behind it, because there's a lot of gut instinct with homework, kind of, that looks like, and sometimes now there's they're doing homework for 3 hours, and there is a question that would come up naturally, which would be, are they really doing homework for 3 hours? What is that? And I just think it's important to match this with research, and so here are our experts to talk about that.
Excellent, thank you. And a privilege to be able to present to you this evening. As always, I'd like to introduce my team. I have Ms. Carrie Jones, our Director of Elementary Education, and Ms. Ann McKernan, our Director of Secondary Education. So I'm going to walk you through some slides very quickly and get to discussion and lean on the panel here for expertise in the subject. So, having just been through some of your policies, I'm certain you're aware that in accordance with state statute, as a Board of Education, you are in fact required to develop, adopt, and implement a written policy concerning homework. And so your policy number 6330 is there. It was first adopted back in 1988, and it was most recently reviewed and revised in 2013. I won't read the policy to you, but as you read it, I'm sure you can see that our policy here in the district does place an importance on homework as an instructional tool, and it does outline some general parameters to ensure its effectiveness. That is to say, the effectiveness of homework. And really, it's our administrative regulations that get into a lot of the nitty-gritty. So, kind of a review of our administrative regulations and also a review of the relevant research on homework has been undertaken. And if you distill the underpinnings of both of those bodies of work, we are really easily able to identify three broad avenues of purpose that relate to homework. The reinforcement of new learning, supporting the development of organizational skills, and leveraging homework as a communication tool with families. And when we look at that, and certainly when we look at research, we're also very much able to recognize pitfalls and practices that we should avoid, which are there on the left. These are certainly not a purpose of homework, should never be considered busy work, should never be given as homework, as punishment. And curricular overflow, meaning we shouldn't assign homework for things because, oh, I really just didn't have time to teach you this, so go home and learn it on your own, and we'll come back and talk to me about how you struggled tomorrow. So these are the broad avenues by which we filtered the information that's in the research and talk about what's exists in our administrative regulations. And it is part of your policy, I didn't flash it on the screen, that at minimum, at least once every 3 years, we review our administrative regulations. And so this report is timely in that regard to talk about what is the most recent research tell us and how does our practice align to the research. So I'll start with sort of this statement that a review of research spanning over 4 decades worth of research, but including most recent research, provides an evidence-based approach for us in terms of our implementation of our regulations to support policy. And I'm pleased to report that we're well aligned with research. There is a full description of the general findings from research that I'm going to summarize for you in kind of 5 short statements. And the first of which is homework does indeed have a positive impact on academic achievement. There is a large body of evidence at the secondary level to support the association between homework and homework completion and academic achievement. And while historically the research had said that that association at the elementary level was inconclusive, there's new research out there today that says if we refine the question to academic homework in a specific subject area, there is a positive association with achievement in that same subject area. And finally, the research goes on to say that some of the benefits of homework at the elementary level may not be realized until a later time. And that kind of points back to, I think, one of our underpinnings relative to the establishment of good work habits, the establishment of a strong work ethic, perseverance, and things of that nature, kind of the softer skills. There's a body of research by Marzano and others that recognize age guidelines. And this research has been both touted and adopted or recommended by the National Parent-Teacher Association as well as the National Education Association. And we've adopted it into our own administrative guidelines, and it boils down to what's commonly referred to as the 10-minute rule. It sort of sets out a parameters for the volume of homework that kids might do in a night, multiplying 10 minutes by the grade level. So a second grader, should have no more than 20 minutes of homework in an evening to include reading. And those guidelines are actually, in terms of, have been researched to make sense in grades K through 8. And they say that in grades 9 through 12, you're really targeting between 90 and 120 minutes to hit that sweet spot, and anything beyond that, you get diminishing returns in terms of the effectiveness of assignments or study. And that is essentially what our regulations point to and what we expect practice to be. But it is the practice that's the question. It's when you do any of the reading of the research, there's a lot of commentary about how much, but it really gets down to, well, what is the quality of the assignments? So teachers have a responsibility to be familiar with what's in our regulations. Our regulations, we have a responsibility to make sure that those regulations are grounded in research on best practice. And here's what it is in a nutshell. Homework itself should be, in terms of devising assignments, should be planful and deliberate. The assignments should be aligned to instruction. Whenever possible, those assignments should provide students with some choice or flexibility in terms of the product and should be grounded in an authentic application of skills. Best practice talks about assignments that should integrate a review of previous learning in addition to what's currently happening in the classroom, because that's been shown to be more effective than same-day learning content and homework, just doing homework of stuff we learned today only. Without that ongoing review, it's not as effective. Teachers are reminded about responsibilities relative to high-quality feedback. If we are simply, and I know from my own personal career as a student, simply sort of checking the box, yes, you turned it in, or no, you did not, that doesn't do a lot in terms of helping that homework be an effective tool for learning. And likewise, teachers are reminded that the opportunity in class before going home to have provided clear instructions, to answer questions, and to do modeling on the types of tasks is dramatically important and has a genuine impact on how well the homework is received and what its effectiveness is to advance learning. So that's a big piece of teacher role. There's certainly also a parent role, and the research has looked a lot more at this in terms of what it means to have meaningful parental involvement in homework versus just homework help. Parents do have a role that's larger than and should be more important than supervising homework time and rolling their sleeves up and doing the work or helping to get the work done. Their role is really, in the research it shows, really more about promoting a positive attitude toward work and finding ways to engage with their kids about what they're doing homework on, about what they're learning, having the conversation. Hey, talk to me about what your homework's about. Talk to me about, show me how to do a problem. Tell me what you know about this. Tell me what you struggle with. And then hopefully you put those two pieces together of parent and teacher, and you have open channels of communication with the parent to the teacher. Here's what my child struggled with, so that they can have that intervention right there in the classroom the next day. Finally, the research bears out that kind of the popular sentiments regarding homework load and conflict might conflict with some of the research findings. It's interesting, the research talks about the idea that when surveyed, kids do, in significant numbers, report high levels of whether it's stress or being overwhelmed or being burdened by homework. But then when those same students are asked about their homework workload itself, they're not reporting that they're in terms of hours and metrics, that they're really overtaxed. Certainly when you look at this at a national scale, students in the U.S. are doing less homework than their international peers. But when asked, the average amount of homework for a high school student, for example, is about an hour and 20 minutes, which is well within and actually slightly below what Marzano suggests. Hey, 90 to 120 minutes is going to maximize effectiveness. And there's interesting statistics when it gets broken down based on what type of grade you might be achieving in a class, and many other factors. So that's essentially kind of a summary of the research findings itself. When compared with our administrative guidelines, we have a close alignment in terms of the research. Our philosophy reflects very positively with what's in the research. So our next steps as a leadership team is to take this most recent sort of refresh and review of our administrative guidelines, content of this report and other research, bring it out to our, and certainly any input from the Board of Education, bring that out to our administrative team, refresh them on that, bring it out to our teacher leaders, and make sure that gets out to each and every classroom to monitor our own adherence to what we're saying is best practice. So that's a quick encapsulation of what was in the written report, and I'd like to open it up for your discussion and questions.
I'd add one thing as a codicil always with this, because somebody's watching or sitting at this table, or me, and says, well, that's not what happened in my child's class here. We can't ever make 100% promises about what happens in an individual class, but we are making expectations more and more clear. At convocation, anybody that's been there, I have said multiple times, if you walk up and down the aisle and can check off a homework assignment, don't ever give that homework assignment again. That's not teaching, that's not grading, that's a waste. So don't do it. Now, not everybody even listens to me all the time now. They do if I'm in the classroom that day. They may not walk up the aisle, but those are the kind of things that, we're making sure people are aware of it. We're pushing this out, but I don't want, anytime I give this, there are going to be exceptions.
I have nothing to say.
Okay. Deb?
Can you talk a little bit about the reverse classroom and whether, I know it's being used in a couple of classes at least in each of the high schools. And how does that align with and fit into the homework policy, given that it's sort of the backwards of what we're used to?
Sure. So the whole concept of a flipped class, sometimes called a flipped classroom or reverse classroom, the whole concept is rather than the teacher sort of standing up and dispensing the knowledge front end, that the students may go home and be asked to read up on an assignment. You can take this to multiple forms in terms of perhaps there are in a technological world some dynamic what's the word I'm looking for? Animations or simulations that they're observing and then trying to identify trends on their own. So sort of trying to move away from teaching as simply telling or the teacher as the sole authority on a topic and asking them to immerse themselves. I would put that as a difference from homework in terms of certainly it's going to count towards minutes at home being asked to read or become familiar with, but at that point it's not necessarily that practice on skills. It's sort of what's my initiation to some content, and it's should be undertaken in a way that's not going to necessarily be promoting struggle. I wouldn't be recommending that, say, in an advanced calculus class, like, hey, I've never taught you anything about integration techniques, but I want you to just read up on this chapter. It's typically going to be based on something where there should be some expectation that I can read the material and digest it without support and come up with opinions that are going to form the underpinnings of an understanding that I then bring to class, and I get into a full-blown discussion on that with the teacher facilitating it. So I don't know if that answers your question or just is a long-winded explanation of the topic that you raised.
Well, I think I'm glad you brought it up, Deb, because this is something that's important for all of us, including people that are teaching in classroom, because even that going through and checking, that's probably how we were taught in our classes, and that's probably what happened. And when you think of what paradigm shift has happened with homework, with flipped classroom, but just in terms of, it used to be if you were going to do cooperative work and cooperative learning, it had to be in the classroom. Now, every night I hear one of my kids and I think, who are you talking to? But it's FaceTiming their assignments together, multiple people, and you think of just how different that makes it for a teacher and the types of assignments, because something that 10 years ago people had said, you're cheating. Well, no, because that's not the way the world works in this segment anymore. So it's really interesting how you craft that work and how much more facile it is for people to be able to do that work together is really interesting too.
Great presentation, and you're so right that we do love this presentation on homework. It's very important and very foundational. I have a couple of questions, and one is on the administrative regulations in terms of the teachers and the grade levels, where you say that you review at least once every 3 years. Is there ever a time when you do a review prior to that 3-year mark?
I mean, certainly if things were to come up, and you have to recognize probably most of the time that we're reviewing, it's because there's probably a problem with the implementation of those regulations as opposed to what's actually in them.
Okay.
As math became a focus, we looked not just at the curriculum, but okay, what are we expecting? What's the work we're giving? How does this come in? What are we doing? So that might fall inside. It may not be technically a review of that guideline, but it's all those things that tie into.
So for example, we've put in kindergarten this year a foundational phonemic and phonics awareness program. It was something we looked at our data over time. We knew it was something that our children needed coming into kindergarten, and blending in with our other Connecticut Core Standards curriculum, which has foundational skills. It was a very structured literacy approach in kindergarten. And one of the really important parts of homework is handwriting practice. And, so we had, the program came with parent guides and letters that went out. So it's, what is that letter formation that really many children are coming in without that fine motor background anymore, that with the advent of so much technology, that fine motor and attention to letter formation is so critical to their reading and writing skills. So that's something we put in place this past year, prior to this review, but we had to really think about that with our kindergarten teachers as just one example of how we're refining along the way as we're putting in new strategies and practices.
The other question I had in terms of advice to parents of students who struggle with homework, so much to the point where they're agonizing over the homework, and instead of maybe putting the homework down and going and speaking to the teacher the next day, they just feel as though they have to get through that homework, and so they're up practically all night trying to get through. What advice would you give?
So I'm sure others can chime in on this. I'll share one thing that just jumps at me with your question from some of the research. There was an article, and it talked about parents, wanting to set, because as educators we give this advice all the time. Set some routines up at home, and so the parent came in and set up a routine that you're going to do your homework right after you get out of school from this time until this time, and this particular family, this example they were using, had one child where that was working very well, and had one child where it was just a nightmare, and there was a lot of resistance, there was a lot of friction, it created conflict in the home, and you fast forward, they later determined that there needed to be, while you needed to set up some routines, the routines didn't need to be the same for every child. And it sort of had to become this discussion with the child, or this understanding from the parent as, hey, maybe, my first child, they're the compliant task doer. My second child, they need a break after they get out of school, and the time that they would actually benefit or prefer and can commit to having the same block of time for homework was later in the evening, just based on personality and things of that nature. So my sort of bottom line with advice towards parents is, have flexibility to recognize that one size may not fit all. And I say the same to teachers. Don't tell parents, hey, you need to do it this way or that way. Like there's an understanding of what we're after, and then figuring out how to make that work in an individual household. So that's just one thing. I'm sure you may have others.
Well, actually, I was just going to ask if you were at my house the other night. But one important thing is for children to communicate their understanding, whether they're actually getting the problems right or the reading right, when they're stuck, to communicate what they do understand and what they don't understand. And that alone can serve as great communication with their teacher. And I've seen that in many classes and many teachers talking about, it's not about necessarily finishing that math problem, but how far did you get? What did you know to do? And then where did you get stuck? And just in that communication can really, really, really be helpful. And as I say, I was working on that with my own child the other night about that. But I think it's great advice, and I think teachers are very open to seeing the efforts there. The thinking process was attempted, and then where did we get stuck? And pick up on that.
This is where communication becomes so important, and it's on so many levels. I had a student one time who is a fantastically successful lawyer now. The first time I noticed she didn't have her homework done, I could tell not answering questions. First time I noticed, I said, "What are you doing?" And she said, "Oh, I do my European history on Saturdays." And I thought to myself, and at first I was like, no. And I was like, actually, that makes sense. I know her class schedule. That's when she has that time. So if that works out, if that's communication with expectations. The key here is not just that flexibility with your own children, knowing your children are different, making sure you're communicating with your teachers, and realizing children aren't widgets. So when we say what's 10 minutes of work, we know that for one kid it's 5 and another it's 15. And that's always the difficulty is, well, do we just base it on the high guideline? Because you can look at one student's schedule and everybody here would say, you're taking way too many classes. And then you look at the kid and it's like, oh, no, they're not. They're actually done with their work by 7 every night, whereas that would kill another child. They could not maintain that level of work. And that's the important thing is that discussion. We mentioned it's course selection time now at the high school level. Discussions with school counselors. That's why the school counselor is so important, because every teacher may say, no, you're ready to take this next level up. So in each of my subjects, they say that, but somebody's got to look at that whole thing. And that somebody is the school counselor, and it's the parents, and it's the child. And you have to, listen, this is all of us that are high school parents or have been high school parents. We struggle with it a little bit. Are you biting off too much? Could you push yourself a little more? So it's really make sure you communicate with parents, school counselors, and really talk to your kids about it too.
At the elementary level, I'll just say cut it off. In general, it's absolutely not worth setting up a long-term future. That those guidelines are in place for a time limit, so it's really critical that they're in our parent guideline curriculum in a nutshell guidelines. That you're double the time. I'd say cut it. It's 10 minutes of the guideline. You're at 20. It's worth ending it. And as children get older, encouraging them to have the conversation and communication with their teachers as well. So the best thing is when the child comes in to say, Mrs. Jones, I really didn't get your homework assignment, or I struggled here. I mean, that to me is the most powerful. So encouraging the child to have the communication with the parent, maybe writing a little note to their teacher on their assignment or in their journal or whatever they're working on, I think is some of the most effective communication, the child themselves.
How do you handle students whose parents, and we have plenty of them in our town, that has a language barrier? And if the child is struggling with homework, but maybe they're at your level, Carrie, elementary, and they want to be able to communicate that to staff, but for some reason, because of their language barrier, they're having some challenges in just trying to communicate that information.
I work closely with for example, our reading interventionists, and one of our children, one of our ESOL teachers and the reading specialist coordinated on how to have the child do reading in their home language to their parent at night. So they found books, for example, in their home language. So that collaboration happens often. So it was a book that was similar. Google has been just a wonderful thing for us. Google Read and Write for many of our children, and Google Classroom at the secondary level. At the elementary level, very often, there are also apps that we're using now with our families and our family liaison, ESOL family liaisons helping us out. So I don't know if Ann can comment further, but we are finding just that much more avenue with technology to be able to have live communications and that, that app message going back and forth, and that collaboration between our ESOL staff and family liaisons and our classroom teachers has really been a significant help. So, writing that email, we can translate it right away. They can write in their home language, and we can use our email to translate immediately.
I was just going to underscore that, the collaboration with the ESOL teachers on that subject is big. I know Ann does, so I know she's chomping, but I used to evaluate a lot of the ESOL teachers when I was in her role, and they do a significant amount of outreach with parents, and they keep close tabs with the teachers, so they're a good monitor for that as well.
Just a little more detail on that. The outreach coordinators have been incredibly helpful, and we have, for the second year now, been able to use grant money to hire an outreach coordinator. And this year we structured our program a little bit differently. We have a primary coordinator, but we've put some of the funds into having people on call for other languages. So we have this availability in Spanish and Portuguese, and as well as other languages. But those people not only serve as translators and helpers, but they also have resources to find others. And I can't tell you, weekly I'll hear good reports about how they're being used. They're being called to a school. There's a situation where someone could just use a little bit of help. And a lot of their work is around new families to West Hartford, who often are families who might have a language barrier that they haven't found the resources for yet to break through. So just to let you know that, I think we're all very proud of that work, and I'm thinking we're structuring that to get the most out of the funds that we were able to secure.
Sorry, whenever we talk about kids, you gotta thank you so much again. I have to say it's very rewarding and promising to hear how there's value placed on homework, not just on the outcome of it, but the process of it. I think it's very important in terms of self-esteem and confidence, and just that communication definitely is key. And I think it's also important for parents to be humbled as well. I have to say that with my fourth grader, I am relearning how to do math. And I thought I did math pretty well, but the way they learn it now is entirely different. So it's time to kind of step back and learn from our children. I think that helps with their self-esteem. And I like how you also mentioned how the benefits may be long-term as well in terms of what's happening at these early stages. So thank you for recognizing the wealth of information and insight that can happen.
I have two other questions. One is fairly specific, which is I understand that in the elementary school grades, how you can keep it to 20 minutes in second grade or whatever. And I understand the team process in middle school allows teachers to coordinate, but how do teachers coordinate in the high schools to make sure that someone who's got a longer project is, right?
Great question, and because I'll tell you, the structures, as you're sort of pointing out, don't really exist, but the students, as my experience as a high school teacher was, the students let you know. And it was and it was more than once where
certainly true in college. Yes.
Yeah. If I were laying out some big assignment, or if I were scheduling, that assessment or something, I'd hear from some students, "Hey, can we get some latitude? We have this big thing going on in, class X," and then generally I'd try to work as best I could within that.
Students are becoming way better at that over the years, self-advocacy in this area.
You said better.
Well, I understand what you mean, but I mean, at least letting us know. And we're encouraging teachers, be human beings about it. If 70% of your class, it's the winter concert the night before, maybe that's not the best day to have the test. If that's, you can argue, well, I gave them plenty of advance notice. Okay, but understand what's going on in our kids' lives. That's something that really, for our staff, the more involved our staff is in the schools, the more aware they are of the rhythms of the school year and what's happening also, too. So that's really important.
Absolutely. In my experience in college, at least, however, those burdens fall disproportionately to female teachers, and often teachers of color, where they will come to me and say, I can't write your paper for Thursday because I have 2 other papers due. I say, well, did you talk to those professors? I say, no, I came to you. Oh, yeah. So I'm just saying, I don't know if that's a pattern in high school too, but anyway, I'm glad to hear that they do speak up, although sometimes it does annoy me. Okay, the last question I've asked before, and so I'll just ask where you are on it. When some students have difficulty in school for various reasons, they've been moved to a mastery program where, I don't know if that's what it's called anymore, but where the expectation is you don't have to do all of the assignments, you have to do enough of the assignment to show that you've mastered the skill or the topic, and then you can move on. And I've often wondered why we don't do that for everybody. It doesn't work for every field, but for example, if the point is that you need to master arithmetic, and the child who can do mastery, once they get 4 problems right, they're done, why don't we do that with everybody? Why do we give kids 20 problems? It seems to me that you don't want to necessarily rely on the child to decide when they've got enough, but there might even be technological ways to say you get... Anyway, I just wonder where we are on that question of what turns into busy work for kids who already get it, but other kids need longer.
I was going to bring that phrase busy work into the answer, into an answer. I don't know if it's... I certainly won't pretend it's the answer, because what you're really asking about is how well do we differentiate homework for students, and certainly when, I think the example you used is a great one, when we're working with a child who is demonstrating some specific needs, whether it's homework completion, so we're putting in a program where we're trying to reduce the expectation in order to inform the habit, And then I assume there's a second half to that, that once we've got the habit built, we're going to slowly increase the expectation back to everyone else. That becomes part of the answer. But I think the larger part of the answer is in the quality of the assignment. If the assignment itself is of a low quality to where it's busy work for everyone, I would tell you that I'd have a harder time just defending the assignment versus any practice as to how many problems are expected. And so that's an issue. And that you know, I'll be honest, that is an issue at times. That sometimes the quality of an assignment that might be put out by a particular teacher on a particular day might not meet the expectation and the scrutiny that I would want to have to try to defend it in front of the board or a parent or anyone else. But I've had situations. Yeah, I've had a high flyer kid that didn't need to practice 50 problems. They had already mastered it. And absent the, you know, part of it becomes how are the teachers grading the homework, presuming they're grading it, how are they counting it into a grading scheme, which we know is a carrot that we use with kids to say, well, you know, why should I have to do it? You know, what do I get out of the deal? And I can say, well, you get, you know, practice on skills, you get organizational skills, and it's good communication to a home. That doesn't, they don't really care about those things. So it's sort of the punishment of not getting a grade. And I can't speak to you on a district basis because I think differentiation and our ability to do that is an area that's still lacking. But I would say that I think there are examples where I can think of a particular student that I had where I sort of said, in this example, I'm just monitoring it, and if they're making it on my test, I'm not that dramatically concerned about it. But my grading scheme on homework didn't mean that they were going to get, it was going to bring them down or up any significant amount. I had a different way that I attended to my homework in terms of what my grading scheme was. And there's a lot of individuality there that we allow for teachers in terms of how they manage their classroom, and we try to set general parameters. I don't want to have one teacher that's counting homework 50% and another teacher that's counting it 5%. So we give them some guidelines across our department supervisors do generally at the secondary level. And then we allow them some flexibility, and where we hear kind of an issue, we try to attend to it. But could we get further down a differentiation trail? Yeah.
If I could, there's an anti-testing thought here, and I do, because I think testing can help in this area in one way. Because I speak to Julio and Dan, who we get a student who we get their SAT scores at junior year, or PSAT sophomore year, and they're in the 90th percentile, and their grades are C's or D's. Well, how did that happen, and how did we miss? So often it has to do with homework. And it's a situation where we failed, because they have that ability, and we haven't pulled it out. Now, a lot of teachers get mad at me for saying that. They'll say, well, the kid didn't do their part. Well, if they didn't learn it, you didn't teach it. I mean, that to me, it was always my standard as a teacher. If they didn't learn it, I failed, because my job, I'm paid to teach them. There are mechanisms now in place, technologically, that are allowing this to be more realistic, what you're talking about. They will know I harp on this. Khan Academy, which I've talked about for preparation for knowledge base with PSATs and SATs, I can load my math class in and have them sign in. I can say to each of them, I want you doing 20 minutes tonight. You're all doing a different 20 minutes, but it's where you are, and it's building on those areas that are weak. It's mystifying to me why that isn't everybody's homework. Now, that's me. I'm pushing it more and more. At some point, I'm going to push it so hard someone's going off a cliff. But that's the kind of thing that I think gets to what we all believe. Why am I doing something I already know? This is a waste on me. You know, it's just as pointless as a word search is giving you 20 questions that you know the answer to. So the idea is, let's use the technology. Let's use what's out there. And we have to expose ourselves to it and be open to the idea that there are new ways of doing things.
And that really was my question. There obviously, you assign someone to do a paper, they do as much as they can, and that's fine. But it was exactly that. It's like, I just remember, because I happened to be really good in math, and I got it after the third problem, and I had to do 20, and I did all 20 because I wanted my A. I was that first child. But if you don't, then it's, yeah, so that's exactly what I meant. There are some places in which that can work. So I'm glad to hear it's a discussion, because obviously it's a moving target. That's my entire set of questions. Anybody else? Thank you. We'll have you back in what, two months for our next presentation? Thank you so much. Oh, and now it is everybody's favorite moment, the financial report. May I have a motion, please, that the Board of Education approve the financial report for the period ending December 31st, 2017? Second?
Second.
Okay, discussion.
All right, hey, it's my turn tonight.
Ah.
You may recall that our former board member Jay Starzan used to call this the highlight of the meeting. We don't have a whole lot of exciting things to talk about tonight, so it's interesting. It's a very low-key discussion tonight. If you go to page 43, for the general public, it's a financial report, the projected balance of the general fund. The bottom number on the right column, basically we've got a $48,000 overall positive change, and what we're going to discuss tonight. In the big picture, that's not a big change. Go to the next page, the general fund report for the period ending December 31st, and I'll point out some interesting numbers for you. If you look at accounts 5111 and then 5112 to 5114, you're going to see some changes there. What that is, it's just it's a change in Title I funding and a minor update. So what this resulted in, there's no change in the overall budget. It's just moving things, who gets Title I, who doesn't. And so that's just some budgeting things going on there. For 5115, Secretary Clerical, we see a change, so some turnover there. Let's see. And some minor updates. A big one to look at, let's go down to 5180, teacher substitutes. And you'll see we've had some more sick days and higher costs for long-term substitutes. Something we've talked about, the substitutes that we need these days are more specialized. And as such, they earn more money, and rightfully so. So those costs are showing. This is the first time we're seeing this in the budget so far this year, these costs. Yeah, the flu shots would come in handy, yes. Yes, so it's very nice. Just going along, let's see, in purchase services, we've got a minor update, 5345 pupil transportation, and that's related to transportation of out-of-district students as they need a van to go to where they are. But again, $10,000, it's minor in the big picture of the budget. Let's see. And that's all I have for this page. We go to the next two pages, actually. Usually there's very little action here in the state and federal grant-funded accounts and special funds report. Really, only minor updates for both of those. So, and then finally, we have our report on the nutrition services. Food services continues to look stable, and we're actually close to break even at this point. And again, it's in the big picture. We look at this. So far, year to date, we are about a $50,000 loss in nutrition services. And you compare that to last year, we'd lost about $15,000. So, we're seeing the effects that we thought we would see, but in the big picture, it looks pretty good. And that is our budget in a nutshell. Any questions?
First, thank you to Chip, who's providing visual aids to
thank you, Chip.
our audience at home. Questions? Okay. Oops, sorry. Okay. Then, all in favor of accepting this report, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, it passes. Okay, approval of the minutes. Can I have a motion that the Board of Education approve the minutes from the regular Board Meeting of Education of January 16th, 2018?
So moved.
Second? Any changes or fixes or edits? Okay, all in favor? Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? Okay. Information and reports. Do we have communications and reports from board members?
Thing not, as superintendent, just for people watching, because I do get questions sent to me, Andy and I, in about 6.5, 7 hours, will make a decision that half of the people will think we're wrong about. Just as a reminder, it's really difficult. The weather reports are coming in at different times. The one thing we know is it won't be snowing when we're making a decision. It won't be icy when we're making a decision. So this is a tough one.
So be nice.
All right, I just want to share with you, I had a chance to attend the Parent-Teacher Council. It was great for me, very happy to be there. We all have our different routes to get to where we are today. I came up through the PTO, so it's neat to be with the folks who are spending their time working with the schools and helping make things even better there every day. We had a speaker from the Bridge come talk about programs they have for parents, and a program at the Family Resource Center at Charter Oak called People Empowering People. And then they also talked about the Parent Leadership Training Institute. And I don't know if this shows up, but right here they got a big asterisk, pending funding, which is a little bit of a heartbreaker. Hopefully they get that. I haven't heard yet, but we certainly hope that funding comes through. Yeah. Okay. So we learned about those programs. That was very nice. We had Ann McKiernan was there pulling extra duty, talking about the school start times and many questions they were interested in as well. And Tom shared the language report that he had shared with us, and the teacher that you always are, you turned it into a nice quiz. It was very interesting. Guess the top 6 languages. You know, a couple of them are easy, and then so it was good. I got to share about the CIP and how we discuss things and how the budget is in process right now with the administration. And one thing I'd like to share with you, on February 17th, there's a fundraiser at Chipotle for the Teen Center in town here in West Hartford. I believe that's for substance abuse, right? And so if you need a burrito, February 17th is the day to get it.
Just want to share that I'm a byproduct of PLTI, Parent Leadership Training Institute, class of 2016. Unfortunately, there will not be a class for 2018, but certainly do hope that it is something that will happen next year. It's a phenomenal program, and certainly more information can be learned about it. So thank you for bringing that up.
Since the students aren't here, one of the biggest games of any year is really a Hall-Conard game. So next Tuesday, Hall-Conard girls basketball, starting at like 5 o'clock, I think, and varsity kicks off at 6:45. So come out and support your team.
Because several board members will be there.
Yeah, in fact, the Friday night game was standing room only, so it's exciting.
It's also senior night.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah, Tuesday.
Wow. Also, congratulations again about the IT award that you mentioned. I also want to congratulate Tracy Wilson, who was a teacher at in West Hartford for many years, but till she retired, she was just on a podcast with Maria Hinojosa from NPR fame, talking about teaching African American history as a model of more culturally and racially responsive, and I'd say more accurate historical curriculum. So that was cool. Dave and I went to the transition to middle school meeting, which was great. They talked about all those issues like lockers that sends everybody into. It's a huge issue, of course it is. And I also went to the transition to kindergarten presentation, which was also, of course, filled with nervousness. But I say that in particular because the Great by 8 group, which runs it, is really an extraordinary group, and I don't know if everybody knows about them. But Great by 8 is a collaboration of pre-K and K and early elementary folks who try to make sure that everything is in place by the time the child is 8 because if it is, then they're really ready to learn. And so it's a really impressive group, and they do a great job. So I just wanted to give a shout out to them. Other announcements? Well, then you'd like the announcements about future business. Future meeting dates. Tune in. February 21st, a regular Board of Education meeting at 7 p.m. Oh, that's right, but this time it's a Wednesday. Thank you, the 21st. Then we go back to Tuesday, March 6th, a regular Board of Education meeting and a presentation of the superintendent's budget. Be there. Aloha. March 14th, a budget workshop, which everybody's welcome to do. That's again on a Wednesday, March 14th. It is at 7, but it's in room, here. Okay, Tuesday, March 20th is a regular Board of Education meeting again at 7. And then Wednesday, March 28th, a public hearing at 7, followed by a budget workshop, number 2. All of them are here. Yes. So it's Wednesday the 21st, Tuesday the 6th, Wednesday the 14th, Tuesday the 20th, Wednesday the March 28th, and if you've kept all that together, you get to graduate from high school.
Did we, because we used to have we did away with that one, right?
Well, that is the question. I think that is one that there are times when we've been able to move all the information into one workshop if we felt that way. So that's something as we get a little closer we can talk about. Yeah.
Well, just the opposite. I thought there was an additional one where we used to meet in 400 and, no?
No.
With food and stuff.
I thought that actually.
Oh, no, you're talking about the Ed Liaison meeting. That's separate, which we're still, that's
Which
with
one
the-
is that?
That's the Ed Liaison meeting
with
with
the
Town
council?
Council, which Matt Hart and I are both trying to find a scheduled time, so.
But that's a
you'll be
public
getting
meeting too, right?
It is a public meeting, yeah. It's not a board meeting per se, because it's, yeah.
No, oh, you mean just us? You know what?
Marco V he wanted to make it more efficient, and we did away with one of the budget nights.
Yeah, that wasn't a meeting, and we've never had a public meeting about the budget in 400 since I've been here. As far as we've had that, and we used to have more workshop meetings. I think we had 3 years ago, and then it went down, and then last year we expanded back out because of it, and it wasn't a budget meeting, it was a PTO listening meeting over at Charter Oak. That was a little bit different, so.
Right, and we haven't talked about that yet, but.
Yeah, we'll see how it.
But the Board of Ed
talk about it.
often goes out in various ways to talk to the community, but we'll see what the budget looks like and where we are. Okay, request for future agenda items.
Yes, I have a request, and I think I made this before, so Tom, it may be under cap, and that was the request for the Tech Ed presentation, especially now that we are an award-winning Tech Ed program. I would love to have that on the agenda item in the near future.
Yeah, I think we had that on, tied in with their curriculum review, so I'll check with Paul about the timeline for it. It may be for the fall. I'll check in with that, but yeah.
Anything else?
Yes, I do.
Oh, please.
I'd like to get a presentation on efforts towards civic engagement for students as well as families involved in the school system. So whether that's in the classroom or through the PTOs, what are we doing to help students and their families learn how to engage on the local, state, and national level? And I'd like to get that hopefully in time to beef it up if necessary before the elections come up in November so that we can make sure we have enough people educated on how to participate in that process.
Yeah, I know the social studies folks are really on top of that, so it would be great to hear from them. That's a great idea. Anything else? Okay. Any comments from the hardy visitors? The few, the brave? No? Okay. I tried. Okay, there's no executive session, so all we need is a motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Boom. We are adjourned.
Good job.